This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, the biggest energy story in 2025 looks like it's going to be about the increasing electricity demand due to EVs, building electrification, and now AI. Now, I have no doubt that we're going to need more electricity as our society electrifies. But across the country, and particularly in California, shortages caused by utilities avoiding and actively stopping rooftop solar power for homes and businesses is going to be very likely. Instead, utilities are building remote solar farms that need to be connected to expensive long-distance transmission lines that take 10 years or more to build, instead of putting in really inexpensive and fast-to-install commercial and residential rooftop solar. Bottom line, it's a manufactured electricity crisis that's going to be hitting us here in California. There would be no electricity shortages, no explosions in electricity costs, skyrocketing rates, no shortages. If utilities leverage cheaper and fast-to-install local solar and batteries, in addition to their utility solar farms, instead of excluding this type of rooftop solar and storage from the state's energy mix. Now, it's great that we're converting society away from fossil fuels and more towards electricity. Electricity is potentially cheaper and always cleaner when we're fueling our economy. And generating power from wind and solar is always cheaper than fossil fuels, always cheaper than nuclear, and always cheaper than geothermal, its generation source. Basically, using electricity as a fuel in almost every way is superior to fossil fuels. Just like burning wood was better, was better than nothing. And then we went to coal, and then we went to oil, and then we went to natural gas and some nuclear. And now we're moving on towards solar and wind powered electricity. Electricity doesn't pollute. EVs are cheaper to maintain, even though they're more expensive up front. But still, people are flocking to EVs, especially as the prices come down. And as a person that's actually on his third EV, they're getting better and better and absolutely superior. My wife said, I don't want another gas car, I want an EV. So now she's got one too. And, in addition to EVs, homes and businesses are using heat pump HVAC systems to operate and heat their home less expensively, more safely, and more comfortably. And I'm living in a heat pump heated home, and it's terrific. I've got essentially zero electric bill. So the benefits of electricity mean that there's going to be growth in power demands in all segments of our economy. There's a steady shift happening, regardless of what happens on the fossil fuel side. Drill, baby, drill is going to slow things down, but regardless of that push, there's a shift to electrification of transportation, EVs, buses, eventually trucks, and heating and cooling buildings. Manufacturing growth is going to consume more and more power. There's a big effort in the U.S. to kind of, reindustrialize, and we're doing that. And those factories require more electricity. And, the wild card, which is all, over the last couple of years, artificial intelligence data centers are potentially going to use enormous amount of power for computers and cooling. I'm saying that's potentially because we really haven't seen how they're getting more and more efficient. And you look at what semiconductors happen. Yes, the semiconductors get cheaper and cheaper, more and more powerful, more and more chips and more and more power there. But they also get more and more efficient and find better ways to cool them. So there will be more demand for AI data centers, whether it's as much as expected. I'm kind of skeptical. Now, without a doubt, as I mentioned, the electricity demand is going to increase quickly over the next 25 years. Now, it's kind of interesting to see what happened historically. Demand growth in the United States flattened out over the past 2 decades, even though the economy grew. You kind of scratch your heads and say, the economy grew. Why didn't our usage of electricity keep going up? Well, there were some things that happened. One of the key things is we had a lot of energy efficiency policies. We had heat pumps and we have air conditioning, and basically all electrical appliances started to have requirements to be energy efficient. You had this Energy Star thing going on, and it actually did reduce the total demand of electricity. The best example, and probably the biggest impact, is the transition from incandescent light bulbs and then fluorescent light bulbs to LEDs. And I just bought another pack of LEDs for my house. It's, this is like a 9-watt LED that costs the same as a 45 or 60-watt light bulb, but lasts 5 times or 10 times longer. And it's just, incredibly efficient. So if I added up the wattages of all the light bulbs in my house, it's probably only 200 or 300 watts, whereas I use that many watts of light bulbs in a single room. So these energy efficiency policies, LEDs, appliances, that kept the demand for electricity flat. But we're still growing as an economy. But now we're starting to do what's called fuel switching from fossil fuels to electricity for EVs, and also fuel switching for heating homes. Although homes had air conditioners and they used electricity, homes also had gas furnaces. And we're switching out those gas furnaces for heat pumps. And those heat pumps use more electricity than the fossil fuel furnace. The recent AI boom is going to increase that demand even more. So when you look at what the demand forecast is going to be, it's according to Grid Strategies, the U.S. is expected to need 15.8% more electricity by 2029. That's 4 years from now. Wow. And it's not easy to ramp that capacity up, and we're going to talk about why in a minute. Now, it's great for our climate as we electrify society with clean energy sources. As I mentioned, generating power from solar panels is cheaper than any other source, including wind, including gas, including coal, including nuclear, hydro, and geothermal. Even when you consider that solar and wind systems are intermittent, they require batteries, in most cases, they're still cheaper. But the economics of a power plant really depend on who owns that power plant and where it's located. And if the utilities own those power plants and those power plants are located hundreds of miles away from where the power is needed, it's going to turn out that electricity is going to be really expensive, whether it's made from nuclear, hydro, or solar and wind. Now, when you look at buildings, solar is without a doubt the preferred source since it's less disruptive in every single respect. Now, here's the big problem, and I kind of touched on it briefly with all utility power plants. Very, very simple. And it's something that lots and lots of people just kind of completely ignore because they look at the cost of just the generation on site. They may say, gee, how much does it cost to build a solar farm per watt? Or they look at how much does it cost to build a nuclear plant or a natural gas plant per therm, whatever. But they're not including the maintenance, and especially they're not including the wires that are required to lead from that power plant to where the power is used. Now, here's the dilemma. Most power is used in urban and suburban areas. People up out in the woods or way out in rural areas, there's not a lot of power demand there. So in urban and suburban areas, you can't build a new local coal plant. In China you can, but you can't do it in the U.S. It's just too polluting and too expensive. You can't build a nuclear plant. We don't have 20 years or more to wait for a new nuclear plant, and it's not going to be built in a suburban or urban area. People don't want that around, so you're going to build it far away. Even repowering old nuclear reactors, many of which they all have wires going to them, whether it's 3 Mile Island or some of the plants in Diablo Canyon in California, even repowering those old reactors, it's going to take a decade. Now, there's a lot of recent talk about geothermal. Geothermal, it works, but it's still at a very early R&D stage. The places where you're going to get the most geothermal power are kind of in volcanic areas. It's possible to drill really, really deep wells and get some heat out of the deeper part of the earth, but that's still really at an early R&D stage. I have customers coming to me, for the last 25 years saying, hey, I want to put a wind turbine on my house and, I'm in the suburbs. Here's the reality with wind turbines. First of all, for zoning reasons, you can't put them in a city. You can't put them in the suburbs. And the second thing about wind turbines is they only make sense in areas where it's really, really windy. If it's not really windy, documented really high wind zones, continuous, the numbers aren't going to pencil out for wind turbines. And, the biggest issue is if solar farms are the cheapest type of solar generation coupled with batteries, there's not enough land available for large solar farms in cities and suburbs. That's why they're located far away. They're located in the desert. They're located, way out of the way. And you have to run long wires to that. So those power plants require wires, and it's the transmission lines that's really, really the expensive part. And that's what's driving electricity costs through the roof in California. And that's why solar and wind farms, they're always built on empty land far away from cities and towns. And it takes 10 or more years to build the transmission lines. And when we're talking about the topic of this podcast, electricity shortages are utility-created BS. We don't have a shortage of electricity. We will have a shortage if we're only building solar farms and wind farms remotely, especially if we avoid installing close-in rooftop solar and storage. So let's kind of take a look at how that works out, because if you put solar on rooftops of residential and commercial buildings, you can use all the existing wires. You don't need to run long-distance transmission lines. So for the power we will definitely need to avoid these shortages, there's two possible alternatives over the next 10 years. One alternative is to build new natural gas plants in suburbs and cities. So if you build those new plants close in, you don't need long-distance transmission. You're able to probably hook up to the local utility grid, and that's going to save a lot of money. So that's just like this picture of the Con Edison plant in Lower Manhattan. And I looked at this plant and I say, I think that's not too far from where Thomas Edison sited his very first electric power plant in 1882. You built them right in the city. Nobody cared about pollution then, and the wires basically just went into the local area. That's the same case with this Con Ed plant in Lower Manhattan. You don't need a lot of long-distance transmission lines. You just kind of plug into the existing wires. So that's one option, is you build a natural gas plant close in, and that's what's going to happen with a lot of these data centers. They're freaking out. They're saying, I want to build all these data centers, Microsoft and Amazon, etc. The only way they're going to get power for that is with natural gas, because that's the only way they're going to build them quickly enough, because there's no other way of powering them. The other alternative is install solar on all available urban and suburban rooftops, residential and commercial and covered parking. That way you're able to use the existing power distribution in the city, and the new power needs from things we talked about, AI data centers, EVs, electrification, that could be met by a whole-scale increase in solar and batteries on existing buildings, and it clearly works. You fly into most cities, they have plenty of low-rise commercial buildings. There are warehouses, there are big box stores, there are strip malls, plenty of low-rise buildings that can host tremendous amounts of solar capacity. And it drives me crazy every time I'm flying around the country. I fly into Newark, New Jersey, and here's a picture of Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right near the airport. And you fly into Newark Airport, you see all these blue rooftops where there are solar plants on top. Public Service Electric and Gas, that's the New Jersey utility, they encourage commercial solar. They put as much solar as they can on those buildings, and they have arrangements with the building owners, and PSE&G is happy to take that excess energy. It avoids them having to find a way to get long-distance transmission. And then I fly home into San Jose, where Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, actively discourages commercial solar. There's hardly any commercial rooftop solar in California, and especially when you fly into San Jose. Here's a picture. You don't see any blue roofs. They're all white roofs. They should all be blue. You fly into Phoenix, you see all these blue roofs, but Pacific Gas and Electric has acted to prevent the installation of solar arrays in the most cost-effective place, which is on commercial buildings and also on residential buildings. So let's see what that implication is of how PG&E and other utilities around the country are starting to restrict the most cost-effective ways of powering our economy in the future. Senate Bill 100, which was passed in 2018 by Jerry Brown. Senate Bill 100 in California requires 100% of California's supply of electricity sales to come from renewable energy and zero carbon resources by 2045. That's 20 years from now. It was signed by Jerry Brown. California obviously needs a lot of new clean energy. And as we mentioned, solar is by far and away the cheapest way to generate that power. But when you look at the amount needed, This is an analysis done by the California Solar and Storage Association. In order to meet that goal of 100% clean energy by 2045, that's going to require, on the average, 9 gigawatts of solar and storage every year for 20 years. Now, here's a graph. You look at the blue bars. The blue bars are how much solar power in gigawatts added by rooftop solar in those years. And the orange bars, kind of going back, are how much solar power was added from utility scale installations. And you see, kind of look at it on average, rooftop solar is putting in about 40% of all the solar capacity in California. That's residential and commercial. And what the California government did, we'll talk about that in a minute, they basically taken that off the option list. So now we're kind of stuck only with adding utility scale solar, which every one of those big utility scale power plants is going to take 10 years to put in the transmission lines that are required. Just historically, we only hit the 9 gigawatt goal of new solar and storage once in the last 4 years. I don't know what we're going to do for the next few years, but looking forward, there's a lot of demand for utility scale solar. There's a lot of demand for commercial and residential solar, but PG&E and the other California utilities have basically put policies in place, and I'll tell you how they've done that, to basically say we're not going to add significant amounts of rooftop solar. They've excluded it. So here's what happened. California government decided to cut back rooftop solar and storage. That includes solar on homes and businesses, commercial solar, community solar, where the solar is shared nearby homeowners, nearby apartment buildings, public buildings, covered parking, tremendous opportunity for covered parking, everything. California is basically saying we're going to suppress that, and we're only going to build most of the new capacity from utility scale solar. And as a result, no surprise, residential and commercial rooftop solar installations in California are down by over 70%. Residential's clobbered. Commercial is even worse because they've changed the licensing requirements. Community solar is essentially stillborn in California. It kind of started here like 15 years ago, but the utilities have consistently passed laws and regulations that frustrate any entity, any developer that wants to do community solar. Other states like Minnesota, doing great. California, almost zero. So even though the rooftop solar potential from residential, commercial, community, public buildings, everything, even though that potential is 100 gigawatts, we're putting in a fraction of that. The installations are going down, not up. And now that rooftop solar is down by 70%, you kind of look at this earlier graph with all those 9 gigawatt gray lines, it's even tougher to meet those goals. Because remember, utility scale solar takes 10 years or more to build the transmission lines. So stuff that we're planning on building, that we started to plan on building over the last few years, when it became really clear that we had a tremendous shortage of electricity due to EVs and electrification and AI, you can't install it fast. You can't fix those delays. There's too many parties involved when it comes to actually identifying the site for the utility scale solar farm, and especially too many parties involved when you figure out how you're going to run those long distance transmission lines that are 200 or 300 or 1,000 miles away from where the cities are, all the way through farmland and right of way and residential, all the way to where it's needed. It takes 10 years. To understand why California is eliminating the successful rooftop solar policies that are most likely to get us to 100% clean energy by 2045, it's really simple. It's all about utilities maximizing their profits. As Rush Limbaugh said, just follow the money. The California government has the goal of getting to clean energy by 2045, but they shot themselves in the foot because they've taken away rooftop solar as a means to get there. And there's 3 easy reasons to understand why the utilities are screwing ratepayers. First, utility spending is going up. And keep in mind, utilities spend more money, they make more profits. And in order to recover the need for those profits, they raise electric rates. So they pay for all this extra spending with higher electric rates. And then they get high profits. And you can kind of see the numbers just jump right out when you look at it. What's happened is California utility transmission and distribution spending. So transmission and distribution, transmission are the long distance wires, distribution are the shorter wires in the neighborhoods and those transformers on top of utility poles. California Public Utilities Commission green-lighted a ton of extra spending by the utilities. And they're spending even more in the future. This spending is going to go up even faster because now they're actually starting to build that infrastructure. It's because we've got a lot of EVs in California by 2035. All vehicles are supposed to be EVs. Big push on heat pumps and obviously AI. California's going to need a lot of AI data centers. Now, you kind of wonder, why did the Public Utilities Commission do that? Because the Public Utilities Commission's goals are they're supposed to be able to provide safe, reliable, inexpensive power to everybody in California. Well, they're kind of striking out. They're 0 for 3. The Public Utilities Commission in California was appointed by Governor Newsom. And several years ago, Governor Newsom received $5 million in contributions from utilities and their employees. So in essence, the Public Utilities Commission and a ton of money went to state legislatures from the utilities and their employees. So California government has basically been bought and paid for by utility financial contributions. Utilities contribute money to our government, and then our government is making decisions that aren't best for ratepayers, but are best for the utilities that are making those contributions. So that's the first thing. The second thing, to pay for all this spending, utilities automatically get to raise their rates. So this is kind of something that's done in conjunction with the Public Utilities Commission. If the utility says, hey, I need to build this new transmission line, heck, PG&E wants to build 10,000 miles of long-distance transmission lines. They're not getting that all at once, but at the time that they're asking for those investments, there's calculations and discussions as to how much rates will go up. And now this chart over here shows the typical historic single-family home rates in California. Now, you're going to see utilities say that the average rates are much lower. That's because when you look at the data from the Electricity Information Administration, it is just for residential. So when you look at residential, it's broken down by apartments and multifamily housing and also single-family housing. So most of the solar work is going on top of single-family housing. So we've kind of adjusted these average rates, including future rates, to reflect what's happening with home electricity rates, not just all residential rates. And when you look at those rates right now, just right now, this is 2025, peak rates are 64 cents a kilowatt hour in PG&E territory and over 80 cents a kilowatt hour in the San Diego area. So the rates are really, really high. Heck, when I started in solar 25 years ago, they were only 10 or 15 cents. A huge increase. So the rates went up. And the third, to no surprise, this was actually the goal all along, all California utilities recorded record profits in 2023. I'm pretty sure the profits are going to be comparable in 2024, maybe even higher. And in 2023, at the top of the list, PG&E had a profit of $2.54 billion. And when utilities are profitable, their executives get huge bonuses and they increase the dividends to stockholders. So we're being scammed. Basically, that's it. Utilities use ratepayer money, our money that comes from our electric rates, to influence our politicians. And then the politicians make decisions at the PUC or in the state legislature to approve utility policies, to kill rooftop solar and approve utility policies, solar farms in the desert, long-distance transmission lines, things like that. And that means that the utilities, once those infrastructure improvements are made and approved, they get to raise our electric rates. And then when those rates come up, the numbers come through from the accountants, they get record profits. So we're totally being scammed. So kind of taking a step back, here's the reality of power plants in the 21st century. The bigger the power plant, the longer it takes to build. It could take, 5 years to build a military ship, and it takes 1 day to build a canoe. So the bigger the power plant, the longer it takes. Nuclear fission plants. There hasn't been a nuclear fission plant, that's Standard Nuclear, built. It's taken fewer than 20 years. The last plants have been over 20 years, and they've been double the original budget. So these nuclear fission plants are really expensive, and that's not even including decommissioning the plants, 40, 50, 60 years from now. Now, you may hear a little bit about nuclear fusion. That's the really, really cool thing. I remember, reading Popular Science 60 years ago, and nuclear fusion was just around the corner. Well, the latest developments in nuclear fusion, you've got a power plant with all this equipment. It's very cool, and it's really still a total science project, like the most ultimate science project. Those power plants are generating enough power, a net power, for a light bulb. And that's just ridiculous, but you need that tremendous infrastructure, and they're just barely, they're getting a spark. It's enough for a light bulb. So we're hearing also some good things about geothermal, large-scale geothermal. Well, Geothermal has been around for a long time. It works really, really well in certain locations where there's volcanic activity around the earth. But you can also drill really, really deep wells and pull some energy out of that. And I got a lot of experience in that 30 years ago when I was doing some geothermal research. But it's still going to take a long time, 15 years or more. And that's a big power plant. Once again, it's going to take a long time to build. And also these big power plants, they're not built in the city. They're built far away. You're going to need a lot of transmission and power lines. And all of those transmission and power lines, whether it's nuclear, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, those transmission lines take 10 or more years. So the bigger the plant, the longer it takes to build. The smaller the plant, like rooftop solar, 6 months or less to put solar on a home. I mean, we're able to do it in a month if the permitting is straightforward. A year for a good size commercial rooftop. Those rooftop systems that we saw in the Newark airport area by Public Service Electric Gas, they're probably built in less than a year. These systems don't need transmission lines. They're using the existing wires that are already in the neighborhood. And most importantly, these rooftop solar systems, they're paid for by the customers. The customers make those investments, not the utility. And that's good for customers, but it's, once again, bad for the utilities because it doesn't get to increase their profits. All right, so to summarize, California electric demand is going up really fast. No doubt that we're going to need more power plants for homes, for businesses, to power electric vehicles, for AI data centers, for new manufacturing facilities are going in. And the best way to meet this demand, we see it coming, it's going to come steadily over the next 10, 20 years, is with both utility solar and rooftop solar. Remember, we can't build big power plants fast. We can't build big utility solar farms fast with the necessary transmission lines. Only small distributed solar and storage power plants scale fast enough to help us meet that 9 gigawatt need every single year for the next 20 years. Plus, these rooftop solar power plants don't cost ratepayers a penny. They're paid for by the customers, not the ratepayers. Obviously, that's bad for the utilities, but that's the most affordable way to get the power that we need. And shame on the Public Utilities Commission for ignoring that fundamental fact. So when considering the necessary transmission wires, small distributed solar and storage power plants are much cheaper. But utilities around the country are taking rooftop solar off the table to maximize their profits. So just to summarize, this electricity shortage that we see happening, this is a manufactured shortage by the utilities. It's BS. They're exaggerating the demand because they say, hey, everybody wants to build data centers. Let's build more transmission. Let's build more power plants. They get a higher profit. But most importantly, they're restricting or eliminating the most cost-effective and faster supply of electricity, which is rooftop solar and storage at homes and businesses. And the result, no surprise, we see it happening in California, sky-high electric rates and record utility profits. That's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of today's show, you can always go to the Energy Show website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.